This is Dennis Ramundi. I'm here with my co-host, Phil Goldberg. Our podcast and now YouTube channel as well, Spirit Matters, found at spiritmatterstalk.com. Also found at Spirit Matters Talk on the YouTube channel. We talk about all things that relate to contemporary spirituality. And we want to ask right at the beginning to hit the subscribe button, whether you're listening to the podcast or watching us on YouTube. Very important to us. And we want to thank those folks out there that have helped keep us on the air by making their contributions. And you can find out about that at spiritmatterstalk.com. We are not a nonprofit. It's not a donation, but we appreciate the support. We're very excited today. I'm very excited. I'm sure Phil is too. We have two gentlemen on that have been, we're friends. We've known each other for many, many years. Dean and I spent many hours meditating in the Alps years ago. And Chris I've known for many, many years. And they are the filmosophers, if I'm pronouncing it correctly. We'll have all the information about that. They discuss films. And I have to tell a little brief, tiny story. When I first met Dean back in the mid-70s, I guess, it was in Iowa. It was at Maharishi University. He was doing a master's thesis, I believe, and the subject matter was the Godfather in the light of consciousness, in the light of spirituality. And at the time I thought, are you kidding? I read it. It was absolutely brilliant. I was blown away because The Godfather was one of my favorite movies. And then I actually thought, boy, the insights he gave me, how come I didn't see those? So anyway, so Chris and Dean have taken this wagon and kept riding it and have done some amazing stuff with their filmosophers. And take it away, Phil.
And I have to say, Dean and I were classmates at that time, and I did my thesis on J.D. Salinger.
Oh, catcher in the consciousness, yeah.
So yes, just so our listeners know, we are indeed all old friends, but this is not nepotism.
We're going to be rough.
It's not nepotism, it's cronyism.
It's cronyism, and it's a bribe. They bribed us to be on the show to promote their...
I think it was the other way around. Yeah, go ahead.
So this is movie night on Spirit Matters, and let's begin with the main event, which is Chris and Dean co-host a YouTube series called Filmosophers. So, which came as a surprise to me, even though I've known them for a long time. So let's begin with why you started the show and what is the purpose of Filmosophers.
Let me just add one thing. Chris was a child actor in Hollywood back in the 60s, and Dean is the author of many books. He's a speaker, and all of us have had experience teaching meditation for many years. And Dean wrote a book, Cinema Nirvana. What more appropriate title? There you go. So they are deeply qualified to speak about films and spirituality. Take it away.
And should we just talk, Dennis? Let's let you know.
Oh, why? Yeah.
Do we need them?
No, you guys are doing fine. We don't.
Okay.
Okay. So
I can tell you real quickly that the genesis of the thing. I had a live weekly radio talk show on community radio station in Fairfield, Iowa for 15 years. And it just kind of was, it was a marriage of my interest in movies, and my interest in spirituality. And we didn't just talk about spiritual films, because any film can be viewed through a spiritual lens or not. Movies are, our modern day version of the ancient stories told around the camp, the fires, and in ancient times, stories of myth, of enlightenment, stories that were meant to entertain, amuse, and frighten. And movies, of course, we know they tap into that collective interest in vicarious experience and seeing the world in so many different colors and variety. So I had this live radio show for 15 years with another friend of mine, and the radio station closed 2-3 years ago. I thought that's that. But about a year ago, I was calling I called my dear longtime lifelong friend, Dean Sluyter, who I knew had written the book Cinema Nirvana, who was an avid film buff as I was, and who had, very, very strong kind of spiritual consciousness credentials. And I asked Dean, would you be interested in resurrecting the show with me and co-hosting as a YouTube channel, as a podcast, which I had not done previously. And to my great delight, Dean agreed. And we started recording some shows last summer and fall. We launched in February. We're posting a new show about once a week on our The Filmosophers YouTube channel. And the rest, we hope, is history.
It will be, I'm sure. Dean, you want to add anything to that origin story?
Yeah, when I heard from Chris, I was a pretty busy boy with other projects, but Chris and I just always have so much fun when we get together that I couldn't resist. And so it really has been a barrel of monkeys, and opportunities to interview people like David Lynch and Michael Imperioli, and as well as lesser but no less interesting names in the film world. And to find out in some cases that they had a spiritual dimension in their filmmaking and or in their personal lives that you might not have imagined. Who knew that Michael Imperioli, right, Christopher from The Sopranos and Spider from Goodfellas, is a very, very serious practitioner of Tibetan Buddhism. So we had just a lovely time talking with him.
If I could ask Dean, I mentioned in the introduction that you had done that paper, and it was a very serious paper about principles of consciousness, of spirituality found in the movie The Godfather. When did you start thinking in that direction? And did it something that just came to you? Did somebody inspire you? Was there one film that triggered that? How did that all begin?
It's just my brand of insanity, just connecting dots that I can't remember that there's a name in psychology for people who see patterns that aren't really there. People who look at the clouds and see, oh, that's the dragon and that's the princess, or that's my father beating up my mother, or as the case may be. And, maybe I have a more benign version of that. I just see connections in things. And as a matter of fact, Dennis, that paper, you've recollected that paper partly correctly. It was actually about several films in the light of.
I think Jaws was one of the films. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jaws was in there. Definitely King Kong was in there, and a few others. And that paper did become the genesis for my book Cinema Nirvana years later. And then what happened was we'd keep going. My first wife, Maggie, and I, we'd go to movies and we'd come out of movies, and I would be running off at the mouth about, and that, in the Groundhog Day when this did, and that's just like this thing in the Dharma teachings, and that's like, and she said, Dean, why don't you go off in the room somewhere and write this stuff down instead of chewing my ear? So that's pretty much how that book came about.
Well, since we brought up Cinema Nirvana already, we'll come back to Filmosophers, but one of the things I always appreciated about the book, because I remember when you were working on it, and I said, well, what films are you going to cover? Was your choice of films to cover, because in spiritual circles, when people talk about spiritual movies,
yes,
it's usually the obvious ones. It's The
Brother,
Wizard of
Son,
Oz.
Sister Moon, yeah.
It's Brother, Sun, Sister, Moon. It's The Song of Bernadette, and whatever. And you were choosing
the Matrix. Yeah.
Yes, that's right.
All that low-hanging fruit.
That's right. The obvious stuff. And you were going for, in a sense, the not obvious teachings in not obvious movies. And
Yeah.
you make those connections beautifully, which separates you from the other people who see connections and become QAnon. And
Right.
uh, so tell us about that process of making those choices, of including The Godfather and I forget what else, The Graduate and Easy
Mhm.
Rider.
Hmm. Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs.
Yeah.
Right. Casablanca had to be there. Right. Casablanca, Dennis, was in that first paper that I did and is the last chapter in the book, because that's the ultimate.
That's
After
it.
Casablanca, there's nothing else to say.
Actually, I quoted from the last scene in Casablanca in my last book
Yeah.
because it was the ultimate of selfless service,
Yeah.
of reaching for a higher cause
Right.
and giving up personal satisfaction.
Yeah. Finding something bigger than yourself,
Yeah.
because it's
we'll always have Rishikesh. Was that no?
right, right, and because you know whatever the problems of three little people don't amount
Right.
to a hill of beans
Right.
in this crazy world. Absolutely, and that's where the bogey character, that's where Rick finds, you know, when we first see him, he's completely wounded. He is under the thumb of dukkha, of suffering, because he's concerned with his happiness, his own selfish, small s self happiness. He's nursing a broken heart. And it turns out that the only way for him to heal from that, we find out at the end, is to, when he has a chance, to get Ingrid Bergman back, to give that up for the greater cause. In this case, the greater cause becomes joining the war effort. And when he you know, that very last shot, when we see him and Claude Rains, right, from behind, walking into the mist, right? And which, by the way, the writers had trouble coming up with that last line. That was looped in weeks later, and you can hear there's a slight difference in the sound quality. That gorgeous line.
It was worth the wait.
Right, it was. Louis, I think this is the beginning of a beautiful friendship. That beautiful friendship is what in Buddhist terms is called, that's bodhicitta, that's universal friendliness. That's the extension of the impulse of love and friendliness beyond the small personal realm to the universal realm. And it's significant, you know, I didn't put this in the book. This one's occurring to me just now. This is how it happens, that we're seeing them from the back because they've lost their faces. They've lost their individuality is now merging into the universality. And by the way, they're walking into the fog, and that's a miracle, because there's no fog on the desert.
Right, it's Egypt. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, this, by the way, I want to warn our listeners and viewers, you'll probably never watch films in the same way again after listening to this. I wanted to ask Chris, you're the one guy here that grew up in the film industry, and then you got very involved in spirituality. Did you make a connection between the two at the time? Were there elements in the film industry that encouraged you to move towards spirituality? And just curious about that.
No, my dad was in the movie business. I got introduced really almost by chance. I went for he was working at Fox Studios. There's a TV show in 1961 that was produced by Fox. They needed a 10-year-old kid. My dad said, I'll bring my son in. I got the part. My parents saw dollar signs and got me an agent. And I went on calls and I got work, and it was a lark. It was nothing to it. And, you know, I helped put groceries on the table during a time when the financial fortune of my family was precarious. And that went for about 4 or 5 years. But it turned out at that time in the industry, the studios, if they could hire a 17 or 18-year-old to play 14, 15, or 16, they could work them longer hours. They didn't need a teacher on set. There were lots of economic reasons why it was advantageous to hire older to play younger. Now, some young actors who, and they're among the ones that were at my age at that time. Kurt Russell was a young kid who was on a lot of calls with me. He got some parts, I got some parts. He hung in there, I didn't. When the parts started to drift away because of the union situation at age 15, 16, I just kind of fell away from it. Well, it turns out a year later, I learned Transcendental Meditation. That just kind of changed my path in life. And I never really missed it. It was fun while it lasted, but I did miss it. But I do still get some still like $1 and $2 residual checks 50 years later.
And having known your mom as I did, I'm surprised she didn't pick at the studio to get you work when it dried up.
She was actually surprisingly easy. She was not a stage mom. She wasn't pushy. There were no expectations put on me. It was very relaxed. We were all kind of grateful, and it was, I'll tell you, I had a blast. It was fun. I got to meet some great people. And I was on shows like Dr. Kildare and Ben Casey, branded with Chuck Connors, a lot of TV commercials. Did a 4-month run on in Hollywood in a stage play, the World of Ray Bradbury. There was 3 one-act plays by Ray Bradbury. It was fantastic. It was just a lark for a 10, 11, 12, 13-year-old.
Wait, I went to that play. I saw that. I forgot that you were in that with someone Gould.
He was
Harold
unforgettable.
Gould.
Yeah, Harold Gould was in it. You may remember him from he played Kid Twist in The Sting. He might have been Rhoda's father in the series Rhoda with Valerie Harper. He's in a lot of movies.
We're giving away our ages here with these film references.
Right.
Yeah, and this was this was earlier. This was 1964. So this preceded his Hollywood career.
Right. Now, about a year or two later, Chris and I actually had a job together. We wound up spending a day in the studio with anyone who grew up in our era in LA area will in the 60s will remember the voice of Art Gilmore. He was this great golden voice baritone radio announcer. This is Art Gilmore. So Chris and I and Art Gilmore made a series of radio spots for the cinematic masterpiece Pinocchio in Outer Space.
Really?
Really. And
I think I was 13. Dean must have been 15. We've known each other since we were babies. Our parents were friends in Long Island before both families moved to LA. And so somehow we got this gig when we were teenagers.
Right.
That's how far back this whole thing goes.
Okay, I'm going to break the you got
just one more point on this, that about a year ago I found on YouTube someone posted the complete set of these radio spots, and you can find them. You can hear our voices. I'm the one whose testicles have dropped. Chris is the other one.
I've got a good excuse, Dean.
Yeah. Okay.
Bill.
So I'm going to ask a different kind of question now. A lot of people in spiritual circles will be very reluctant to see movies that are overly exciting or negative, that have maybe some violence or some dark themes and that sort of thing. The Godfather is one of them. I remember people, I'll tell that story another time, but talk to me about that effect of jarring content on, that deters people. They think it's not spiritual somehow to see, violence on screen or troubling themes, people suffering, people being oppressed or whatever. How do you see that, and what can people find in certain films to transmute that?
Well, I could make a quick comment and then ask, get Dean's opinion. I see it both ways. I certainly understand people who take the approach that, what you put your attention on grows stronger in your life, and you want to put your attention on, if you want to put your attention on positive and wholesome and life-supporting themes and content, you want to avoid things that may be troubling, disturbing, violent. The other side of it too, I think, is that, just to be natural and to go to your tastes. And I think that you can watch films of any kind and maybe consider it a test of the stability of your own inner awakening. That, as our friend David Lynch, the director, says, because people ask him all the time, David, you've been meditating so many years. Why do you make such dark, troubling movies? He says, conflict is as old as the world, as humanity. But you don't have to suffer to show suffering. You don't have to, to show troubling or conflicting situations. You don't have to take it on yourself. So I do understand and see it both ways.
Yeah, I would say two things. One thing is that people are wired differently, and from one person's tolerance for seeing violence on the screen, their tolerance level is going to be very different from someone else's. So there are films that I won't watch, but then there's a lot of things I'll watch that even my wife won't watch. It's kind of like, the old George Carlin thing about driving. There's two kinds of drivers on the road with you, morons and maniacs. Morons is everyone going slower than you, and maniacs is everyone going faster than you. So kind of like, so I consider, to me personally, it feels like people who won't watch The Godfather because they think it's going to upset their spirituality. I just think they're prigs and prudes. But really, the bigger view is that it's all relative.
Yeah. All right, let me follow up on that.
Yeah.
For both of you, a film that you saw, either of you saw, that was particularly spiritually inspiring for you. Chris?
Oh, yeah.
Either way, yeah.
Particularly inspiring?
Well, yes, a film you saw that maybe you've seen it more than once, that you were very inspired spiritually.
There are a couple of movies that get me every time. It's a Wonderful Life and Field of Dreams.
There you go.
They get me every time, and I've seen them over and over many times. I mean, some of my favorite films, among my favorite films, are Lawrence of Arabia and Patton, and they really, they plot the hero's journey, and they're movies of people who are in their dharma, who are on their evolutionary path, and have really found their time and place to just, to really discover themselves and really make their mark. So, those are among the ones that come to my mind.
Mm-hmm. I mean, there's films that I can watch over and over again. The Third Man, but specifically spiritually inspiring, the top of mind for me, Wings of Desire. And do you know that one? Wings of Desire, shot in Berlin. Shortly before the fall of the Berlin Wall, and it's about angels and the angels, first of all, the way he represents the angels, they're tall men in trench coats with ponytails. And what they do is they go around and they find people who need healing, people who are just upset, depressed, contemplating suicide, and they whisper in their ears. And they help, and of course the people can't see them. They think it's their own thoughts, and they help bring. And that's just the beginning where it dives off from, and then it gets deeper and crazier than that. And then halfway through, Peter Falk shows up, and it's incredible.
Bill, do you have one?
Well, what came to my mind was, people often ask me, because of my work, what drew me to India and the teachings of India. And one of the early influences, before I read all the books I would later read and all that, was seeing the Apu trilogy, the sublime series of 3 films by Satyajit Ray, the great Bengali Indian filmmaker, taking one person's life from childhood into adulthood in three. And the middle film, as I recall, is set in Varanasi, what we call Varanasi, then was Benares. Beautifully filmed in black and white, with a score by Ravi Shankar before anybody knew who he was. And I said, oh, I got to go there. And it was just, there was something about the music of Israel. And of course, because it's India, the spirituality is just part of the ambience of the whole series.
I want to throw my couple out. One would be City Lights with Charlie Chaplin. Really just moved me to the core, and the silence and what he did with the silence. That was amazing. And then if you have 5 hours sometime or 6 hours, I just remember as a kid seeing The Robe, and then it was a double header at the twin bill, and the sequel to The Robe, which is Demetrius and the Gladiators. And it just went on for a long time, but I felt very inspired by it at the time. But there are many, many films. And again, after reading Dean's thesis or his paper, I started to think about it more, that yes, I'm discovering spirituality in films that I never thought to even look for it in. And so I think that get the book, Cinema Nirvana, see how you can start thinking in that direction, with or without the book, but the book certainly gives you some insight into it. And it makes everything richer and fuller, just like seeing spirituality and everything we experience in our lives, you know. So
I want to pick up on that, because I was going to ask this question mainly of Dean, but you too, Chris. The kind of thing you do in Cinema Nirvana, of finding the sort of the teachings, the dharmic teachings, the spiritual teachings in unexpected places, is that a habit of mind that people, are there methods to doing that? Is there something you would advise someone to do going to any movie to see what is to be gleaned? Or is it just the way you happen to perceive things?
It just happens for me. I don't know how it can happen for other people. You may recall when we were with Maharishi in, where the heck was this? When I think it was Interlaken, Switzerland. Yes, doing Vedic studies in Interlaken in, what would that be, 1973, 74, that winter, I think. And he gave us an assignment to go home and go back to our rooms, and the next day come back to the meeting with some kind of schema of showing the relationships between the different branches of Vedic literature. Okay. And there's a videotape of this somewhere in the bowels of the TM video archives. I would love to see this, because at the very end, a couple people get up and someone made a windmill where, okay, the veins of the windmill are the four Vedas, and this is this, and at the very end, of course it's at the very end, because as always, I was last minute. I think standing in the back of the room making my little drawing. And then I came up to the microphone. I was a drawing of an elephant. And I don't remember what, but you know, the eye was something was the Upanishads, and something was the Bhagavad Gita. The tusk is this, and the eye is this, and so forth. And Maharishi just laughed. He just clearly, I made a hit with him. So it's just, that's the way I'm wired.
And sometimes
it's a good thing, because my skill set is extremely narrow. That's about it. I can't change a tire. My wife has to pack my suitcase for me.
There's at least three of us, 4 of us probably in that same boat. Yeah.
Phil, Phil, if I could just a take on your question about the habit of, is it a frame of mind that you can cultivate, or culture? I'll read film criticism sometimes, film reviews, and I'll feel like a dummy because I'll read the thing and think, well, I didn't think of that. I can see that, and yeah, that kind of brings out some value of the film that I didn't even consciously appreciate, but that I recognize, and some I agree and some I don't. I think, people just see through the lens of their own awareness, and it may be that just Dean may disagree with this, but I think it's a kind of a sign of integrated awareness, integrated consciousness, and integrated intellect, that there's an old saying, you see what you are. And, you can watch a movie, and if you're kind of have that through that lens of awakened awareness, you'll see the connectedness, you'll see the humanity, you'll see the archetypes, you'll see the knowledge teachings. And but maybe sometimes, as Freud said, a cigar is a cigar, and you just watch the movie and take it on its own terms too.
Right.
Yeah, but you're right that you should be able to find that anywhere. I mean, that was Maharishi's whole premise of creating his whole curriculum at Maharishi International University, looking at geology, looking at musicology, looking at all the traditional disciplines through that lens. In fact, my first book, this is my one book that went out of print, is called Why the Chicken Crossed the Road and Other Hidden Enlightenment Teachings. It's hard to find because it's out of print. But there I took like jokes and nursery rhymes and old proverbs, things. You could do it. I could probably do it with science if I knew anything about science.
Right. But Dean's had some of the great book titles of all time. I remember one, The Zen Commandments. Is that right? Was that yours?
It is, but I can't take credit for it. That was, I had a different title, and that was the one that my publisher insisted on. We actually had a little bit of a fight about that. Phil, I'm sure is
yes,
familiar.
I've had those fights, and usually I'm glad I lose.
Yeah, right.
Hey, Phil, we should wrap it up. So,
well,
any
yeah,
final points?
We have some time left. I want to ask about Filmosophers again.
Yes.
You've done 6-7 shows by now, as I recall. What was there anything in the interviews you've done with people that really surprised you?
And let us know where it's available. Let our listeners know. No.
Yeah, well, if you go to YouTube, and we have a channel there. It's The Filmosophers, FILM.
We'll have it all posted up too. We'll have it posted.
Yeah, right. As well as wherever you get your podcasts, you can get it in podcast form.
And a tagline we sometimes use is, "We help the film fan avoid the flim flam," which my kids think is completely corny, but I'm so attached to it. And so, yeah, go to the channel. Please subscribe if you like what we say. And to answer your question about surprises, let me think of any.
You don't
surprises.
have time to think, Chris.
My favorite.
Go ahead.
I would say one surprising moment that I enjoyed when we were interviewing David Lynch, and I had a little bit of a coughing fit, and my first thought was, okay, we're going to have Chris, actually Chris's wonderful daughter Rebecca, who does editing. Okay, Rebecca will cut this out. But then David said, "Boy, that's an interesting sound. That's really cool. I could really do something with that sound." So we had to leave it in.
The interview with David was really fun. We did a little bit of David Lynch trivia at the end of the show, where we I read some of David's, because David writes all his own films. I gave him some of his screen dialogue, and he had to identify which character said the line. It was really, I said, these are softballs, David. I think you're not going to be in trouble. He said, "Don't set the bar too low, Chris, because then if I mess up, it's going to be really bad." But David was delightful. He did a 10-minute riff on finding the perfect chocolate milkshake at Bob's Big Boy. That was just a delightful digression. But all the guests have been great. We've had Academy Award production designer Eugenio Zanetti, who won an Academy Award for the film Restoration, talking. Wow. And he's quite an amazing, that's actually being posted soon. Just a real Renaissance man, painter, artist, opera and theater director, and a Sufi practitioner. So we got a real insight into Sufi philosophy. As Dean mentioned, Michael Imperioli is a Dharma practitioner.
Quick question about Michael Imperioli.
Yeah,
he's such a quintessential tough guy in at least in the roles I've seen him play. The kind of actor who you think he can do something really heavy at any moment. Did you ask him about, as a Tibetan Buddhist practitioner, whether it's easy or difficult to play that kind of criminal character, that kind of antisocial character?
we didn't go there with him, but I never personally felt in danger or under threat with him in the interview.
Well,
But
it was via Zoom, we're safe here. But if you watch through the whole Sopranos, all the seasons, even just as that one character as Christopher, he has such vulnerability, has such sweetness and sensitivity, which he's then always trying to cover up with all this tough guy armor.
Good.
But the most interesting thing I think that I recall from our interview with him was, having spent some years doing Vajrayana, Tibetan Buddhist practice myself, I asked him about, there's a kind of very typical Vajrayana practice where you go into meditation, where you go into the place where everything is kind of dissolved, and then you meditate on what's called an idam, which is a meditational deity, some particular character, like one of those forms you see on my altar, and you're chanting a mantra to the deity and so forth, and you become that. You take on that body, you take on that form, and then at the end you explode it. And the point of it is not to stop being Dean and start being this deity, but to find out that you're not Dean or a deity. You're not any form. You are the formless, and you can put on and take off these different suits of clothes that we call bodies and personalities. And I was very interested in whether he had made the connection between that kind of practice and acting. And he absolutely had.
That's great.
And he absolutely said, yeah, it is the same process. You have to really do it. You can't just start trying to take on another thing. You have to dissolve back into that place of everything dissolved, and then reemerge in this form, and then drop that.
And we will now dissolve. This was a joy. We had the Siskel and Ebert of spirituality with us, and watch their YouTube channel.
Yes, we'll have that all posted up. And so when you go to their YouTube channel or to their podcast, subscribe, and
then go to our channel and subscribe to us.
And donate to these
great causes.
These guys, Dennis and Phil, for God's sake.
Keep us on the air. Probably will stay on the air anyway, but now in our archives, about 300 shows, free and open to the public. Please take advantage.
Okay.
And the Filmosophers, thank you so much. We'll have all their information up, and I'm sure we're going to do another show with them at some point.
We'll look forward to the coming episodes.
Thanks for having us on.
All the best.
Thanks, guys.
Thank you. Phil, that was Dean Sluyter and Chris Busch, friends of ours. It was sort of a reunion. And Dean mentioned Interlaken, Switzerland. Back in the day when we were teaching TM, 70s, early 80s, whatever, we'd go on these long meditation courses. Well, they were 6, 7, 8 weeks, whatever they were. But we'd spend many hours in meditation and meetings about the Veda and knowledge of that sort. And it was a lot of fun and great to reflect back on that. And these guys are fascinating what they're doing with their review of films. I'm sure the Filmosophers are taking take a different approach than anyone else. And you know, is obviously something Dean's given a lot of thought to. Cinema Nirvana. What a great concept for a book.
I've been talking to Dean about movies for 50 years, probably.
Yeah.
No, he's a real, I wouldn't say scholar of film in the academic sense, but a real student of film, because, you know, he comes from a literature background.
Right.
And he taught literature for many, many years. And so he has that acute ability to find in works of art teachings and subtleties that most people don't see. It's like, you know, if you took a good course with, you know, a film professor or a literature professor, you learn, you see things that because of them that you wouldn't see on your own. So
and he mentioned that he has this ability to see certain patterns and tie things together. I mean, we all do that to a certain degree, but he seems to have a very developed skill and interested in that area, and he loves film, and he's a film buff, as is Chris. I mean, Chris grew up in that industry, and I've talked to Chris over the years. I was working out of the same radio station that went under that he did. We had a lot of fun over several years, and yeah, he just loves film, and they stay on top of it. And it was interesting, everybody's choice of films that they like. And when he mentioned Casablanca, and in a spiritual light, it was fascinating because recently a friend of mine quizzed me on like 100 quotes from films, and the film that was quoted most was probably Casablanca. There are many great lines in it. Gone with the Wind, there are others, but Casablanca was way up there. But sure, there was
and you know, here's an interesting tidbit someone once told me. I hope it's true, that the line "Play it again, Sam." Yeah, it's not in the movie.
Right. I'm.
It's play it, Sam. Play it again.
Because yes, that was pointed out to me, and I said, no way. And then I watched the movie, and that's what I looked for. The other thing I was told about Casablanca, and we're getting a little off the track now, but that's okay. And that is that the actors didn't know how it was going to end.
That's right.
What was going to happen, and it's just fascinating. But the idea of them walking away, and that idea of selflessness, and walking into the fog, the abyss, that oneness, that everything blurs. Well, that was pretty powerful.
One of the things that's obvious about good storytelling is, you know, the character arc is central to a good story, and we see on screen or on the page of a good novel character transformation.
Right.
And a character that transforms into a more expansive place, into a more noble place, into a more loving, kind, mature, perceptive person, which is, you know, the kind of direction characters usually go. That's, at least to some extent, a mirror of, or exemplar of spiritual progress. Because we all aspire to grow in those kind of directions. It doesn't have to be, you know, getting enlightened or realize, just learning to be a kinder person, going from criminality to doing something of service, being brave. All those things, you know, are the things that drive.
Right, and going back to Casablanca again, the main character being about a guy in this, what they used to call a gin mill, a bar, and just sort of living a very small life. And then all of a sudden, he's fighting the evil of the world.
But he starts off, he's a cynic at first. He's a cynic. All this, there was nothing noble about him at first. And Ingrid Bergman comes along, and the love is rekindled, and his despair and all that is, you know, love conquers all, so to speak. And he rises to be a a better person because of it.
I read that one of the reasons that movie was made was to encourage the American public to go from a sense of being neutral during a war where there was an evil force at work, in the opinion of most people, and to rise up and take responsibility. There was a second movie that Humphrey Bogart made with Lauren Bacall, which is very similar to Casablanca, with the same theme, and that's To Have or Have Not.
Oh yeah.
That's where he married Lauren Bacall shortly after that movie. This is stuff that we usually don't get into.
But let's get back to Chris and Dean and their enterprise of filmosophers. They're interviewing interesting people. Now, I looked at their roster, and David Lynch is a famous figure in film. Most of the other guests are not.
Right.
But, they're interesting role players in the making of movies. Michael Imperioli's an actor. They had documentary filmmaker. They've had people, who are in other roles in the filmmaking process. So it's an interesting series.
And I want to say that when I had my radio show, I got to do a half-hour interview with David Lynch, and he's a guy of great depth. And as a matter of fact, they used elements of that, segments of that interview, and they actually came and videotaped me talking over the same lines, because Richard Beamer, who's an actor who was in Twin Peaks, made a documentary about David Lynch and his spirituality, and that came out in it. And by the way, Richard Beamer is another guy very committed to his spiritual growth, and another person at Hollywood.
I spent a few days with Richard in Varanasi, 2001. It was wonderful to be with him. He's a very interesting guy. Speaking of which, we're recording this in June of 2021, and Richard became famous playing in West Side Story. And the revised Steven Spielberg directed new West Side Story will be out this coming winter.
Well, I think they might push it back. They might push it back as far as December 2022. It was supposed to open.
No, I just heard yesterday it's opening in December.
Oh, it is. Okay. And we're on the subject. Richard, I had a conversation with him recently, and he was invited last year to go to the set that the Spielberg set. And Richard thinks this version is going to be fantastic. He said the talent level is off the charts. So something to look forward to, because the first one came out back in the early 60s.
61.
Yes, and I remember that because the New York World's Fair was down around that time, and they had dancers from West Side Story performing that. Now we're really getting into the old times, but
that film, because it's based on the Romeo and Juliet story,
right?
That has, in addition to the music and everything else, there's great storytelling in there.
Great storytelling and based on spirituality and the story of life and things that go on, and there you go.
All right.
So till next time.
See you at the movie.
A very different type of interview this time, but hopefully our listeners enjoyed it. And please, asking you kindly, please subscribe. Click that subscribe button, whether you're listening to the podcast or if you were on the YouTube channel. Tell people about us. Email us. Give us advice, suggestions, feedback. And if you want to make a contribution, go to spiritmatterstalk.com. and it'll explain what to do there. So again, we have about 300 shows in our archives. Go in, listen to them, free and open to the public. Spread the word.
All right. Over and out.
Over and out.